Imagine a hall filled with whispered conversations, laughter, and the clinking of glasses. A celebration in full swing, with lights softly glinting off crystal and waiters skillfully weaving through the guests with trays. In the center stands Charles, a man who has built his life around devotion and family values. Tonight, this evening represents love, strength, and self-sacrifice for him. But in a single moment his happiness crumbles. Before his eyes, his wife Nora shares a brief kiss and a bitter smirk as she reveals a truth poised to destroy his inner world and his entire life. Immerse yourself in a story of betrayal, secrets, and a struggle for dignity, where each of Charles's steps is a bid for survival in a world that has suddenly turned foreign. My dear friend, be sure to subscribe to my channel if this is your first time here, and give your royal like to this video. The ballroom was filled with the hum of voices, laughter, and the clinking of glasses, with waiters weaving through the guests with trays glimmering in the lights. Standing almost at the center, Charles silently observed the scene, his hands clasped thoughtfully behind his back. Surrounding him were friends, family, and colleagues, those who had accompanied him through the years. Several familiar faces raised their glasses toward him, offering congratulations from afar, and he responded with a warm, grateful nod. This night held deep significance for him. It symbolized not only his eldest daughter's wedding, but also the embodiment of the values he had always upheld: dedication, resilience, and years of hard work. This was his life's achievement, a legacy he hoped to preserve, a life centered around family, honoring his roles as father, husband, and friend. Family had always been his highest priority. Scanning the crowd, his eyes fell on his wife of 31 years, Nora, gracefully making her way over. Her blue dress accentuated her figure, and her hair was styled just as he liked it. She was his partner, his love through all these years. Behind her, their 5 children followed, joking and laughing, filling the air with warmth. "Charles," she called out, her smile lighting up her face as she approached. His heart swelled with affection. "Nora, you're radiant tonight," he whispered, taking her hand. "Everything feels almost perfect." She smiled back at him, but he caught a glimmer of something unspoken in her gaze, a fleeting shadow. Out of the corner of his eye, Charles noticed Dylan, his best friend, surrounded by children who listened to him with fascination and laughter. Dylan was practically family. He had been there through every hardship, even during those years when he and Nora struggled to become parents. A wave of warmth and gratitude washed over Charles as he looked at Dylan, his closest friend since college. They shared an unbreakable bond, strengthened by years of memories. But as he watched them, he felt a sudden, inexplicable unease. Nora approached Dylan, and to Charles's confusion, leaned in to kiss him briefly but strangely intimately on the lips. Charles's smile faded, disbelief flooding over him as he tried to process what he was witnessing. He thought it must be a misunderstanding or a trick of the eye. But then he saw her lean in again and, loudly enough for him to hear, speak sharp, scalding words. "Can you believe he still thinks these kids are his?" Her words hit him like a punch in the gut. His mind struggled desperately to process what he was hearing. "We let him believe that the infertility treatment worked," she continued with a smirk. "They're yours, darling, and now he's paid for this ridiculously extravagant wedding." Her words sank into his consciousness, overturning everything he knew. An icy weight settled in his chest, each heartbeat heavy with betrayal. His vision blurred, and he struggled to breathe as the truth took hold of him. As if to confirm his pain, his youngest son approached and looked at him with a mocking sneer. "We just played the role of perfect kids," he said derisively. "Our real father is Uncle Dylan." Charles's hands began to tremble, his face pale as he looked at the family he had devoted his life to, barely grasping the full extent of their betrayal. Gathering all his strength, he took a decisive step forward, his voice quivering with fury. "This wedding," he declared, each word filled with pain, "is over." The music stopped, and the room fell into silence. Guests turned toward him, their whispers replaced by stunned silence. His daughter, the bride, looked at him with wide eyes, her expression a mix of confusion and fear. "Charles!" Nora began, panic flickering in her eyes, but he silenced her with a raised hand. "No," he stated firmly, his tone cold and final. "I've heard enough lies." Dylan stepped forward, raising his hands as if to calm him. "Charles, please, let's discuss this privately," he murmured. Charles's smile vanished, leaving his face hard and impenetrable. "Don't call me that!" His voice cut through the air. "You lost the right to speak to me as a friend." His piercing gaze locked onto Nora, who paled as her composure visibly cracked. Nora's cheeks flushed, and she took a hesitant step back while the children moved closer to her, their faces reflecting a mix of shame and awkwardness. "How long?" Charles asked, his voice trembling with barely contained anger. Nora opened her mouth, but he repeated louder, "How long?" His voice echoed through the room, and the guests around them stirred, pretending not to listen but unable to ignore the unfolding scene. Nora's eyes lowered, and her voice became a faint whisper. "Since the beginning," she finally confessed. A hollow feeling filled Charles's chest as the truth settled in his mind. She hadn't been honest with him. Not since they found out they couldn't have children together. Memories flared of their shared pain, endless visits to doctors, and the fragile hope he had cherished each time she reassured him. He had believed her completely, trusted her and the specialists. When Dylan started to speak, Charles silenced him with a look sharp enough to shatter stone. "So," he exhaled, each word laced with bitterness, "you let me believe I was their father all these years?" Dylan lowered his gaze, guilt keeping him silent. Charles turned to the children, who pressed closer together, as if only now understanding the weight of their secrets. Almost in a whisper, he said, "I gave you everything." He took a deep breath, trying to contain the fury of betrayal that surged within him. "I sacrificed everything for this family. For a lie." His eldest daughter, standing in her wedding dress, took a small step toward him, her face pale. "Dad, please," she whispered, her voice trembling. A sharp, bitter laugh escaped him. "So you didn't want me to know? You all knew, didn't you?" He looked at each of them, his voice quivering under the weight of realization. "Each of you knew and still let me believe." The silence that fell over the room became unbearable. The bride's face twisted as tears began to fill her eyes. Nora stepped closer, desperation etched into her face. "Charles, please," she whispered, reaching for his hand. "We can fix this. I made a mistake, but I love you." He recoiled from her touch as though her hand were poison. "Love?" His voice was soft but sharp as a blade. "You don't even understand what that word means, Nora. None of you do." The children exchanged worried glances, realizing the depth of the wound their deception had inflicted. Charles's voice turned icy. "I want all of you out of my life. You're stripped of everything, no inheritance, none of what I sacrificed for you." Nora's face contorted in disbelief. "Charles, you can't be serious," she stammered, her voice shaking. But he took another step back, feeling the finality of his decision weigh down on him. Forgiveness was impossible. Not for this betrayal. He looked over their faces one last time, Nora, Dylan, and the children he had once thought of as his own, then turned, leaving them in the silence of the ballroom. Each step seemed to lift the weight of their betrayal, shedding it with every stride as he walked away from everything he had once built for them. Returning home, he felt a strange peace, a quiet that served as a refuge after the chaos of revelation. But though he had severed all ties with them, they weren't ready to let him go. The calls began a few days later, first from Nora, then from each of the children, even from Dylan. And then, one evening, as he returned from work, he saw her, standing at his doorstep, waiting. In the dim light, she stood with her shoulders slumped, her face pale, as if she were slowly fading away. The bright, confident smile she once wore was gone, leaving only an expression of deep sorrow. Her eyes were moist, though she held back the tears. When she saw him, her voice barely rose above a whisper as she uttered his name, Charles, and it trembled with raw emotion. She stepped closer, her hands shaking. Please, we need to talk. He smirked, his voice laced with bitterness. A mistake? You call this a mistake? She flinched, her lips trembling as she reached out to him. Her fingers barely brushed his sleeve. Charles, please, it was just a moment of weakness. His voice dropped, tense with anger he was struggling to contain. A moment of weakness? 31 years, Nora. This wasn't a simple mistake. You built an entire life on deceit. She collapsed, burying her face in her hands, sobbing. I'm so sorry, Charles. I thought you'd never find out. I believed I was protecting us, protecting the children. He raised his hand, cutting her off. Protecting them? Teaching them to lie to me, making me live in shadows? Don't you see? You've poisoned everything good in my life. She shook her head, tears streaming down her cheeks. Please, I'll do anything. Don't let this be the end of us. For the children, he replied with sarcasm. You mean Dylan's children. You destroyed any trust we had. There's nothing left. As she opened her mouth to respond, he turned away, walked inside, and shut the door, leaving her outside, silencing her desperate pleas. Even with the door closed, he could still hear her muffled sobs, her cries of his name. He paused for a moment, pitying her, but pushed the feeling down. He wouldn't yield. Not this time. The next day, his eldest son, Grayson, came by. Tall and lean, Grayson shifted from foot to foot, his hands stuffed in his pockets, his face tired. Dad, he began, his voice trembling. Can we talk? Charles folded his arms across his chest, his gaze cold and unforgiving. Talk? About what, Grayson? You had years to talk to me. Grayson's eyes dropped, avoiding his father's stare. I didn't know, Dad. I swear I thought you already knew. Charles laughed briefly, bitterly. You thought I knew? And you just played along, pretending everything was fine? Grayson raised his eyes, regret flickering in them. I was a child, Dad. I didn't understand. And later, I thought it was better to keep pretending. I didn't want to hurt you. Rage was building within Charles. Hurt me? You all already did that, Grayson. Every one of you. Don't say it was out of love. You kept this lie alive because it was easier than facing the truth. Grayson sighed heavily, reaching out a hand. Please, Dad, don't turn away from us. I still care about you. Charles stepped back, shaking his head. Caring is empty when it's based on lies. I can't trust any of you. One by one, the others came. Luke, Charles's second son, claimed he had only acted on his mother's instructions and didn't understand the consequences. His daughters, Hannah and Riley, wept, begging for forgiveness and swearing they never meant to hurt him. Samuel, the youngest, looked at him with sad, innocent eyes, insisting he was too young to understand what was happening. Charles narrowed his eyes, repeating coldly, Too young to understand? You weren't too young to mock me, he retorted sharply, or to take part in the deceit. Samuel's face darkened, and he mumbled, I thought it was just a game, Dad. I didn't know. Enough, Charles snapped, his patience worn thin. You're old enough to know right from wrong, all of you. But Samuel continued, his voice trembling with desperation. Please, Dad, don't push us away. We still need you. Charles's gaze hardened. Need me? He looked at them, his eyes a blend of anger and hurt. You laugh at me behind my back. You call me a fool. You don't need me. You need what I can give you. Samuel's face reddened with shame, his fists clenched, and he murmured, It wasn't like that. Charles's voice cut through the silence. Then tell me what it was, Samuel, because apparently I missed the truth. But Samuel had no answer, mumbling a few indistinct words. Charles felt bitterness swelling inside him, his shoulders slumping under the weight of disappointment. Without another word, he turned away, leaving Samuel standing silently on the porch. Every encounter with his family only deepened his resentment, until one evening, the sight of Dylan in his yard became the final straw. As he pulled up, Charles saw Dylan leaning against the car, hands in his coat pockets, his face serious and tense. Charles stepped out, his expression icy. "You have the nerve to come here?" Dylan straightened, clearing his throat. "Charles, I know you're furious, but hear me out." Charles scoffed, locking the car, heading toward the house. "Furious doesn't even cover it." "Please," Dylan insisted, trailing him. "I was wrong. I should have told you the truth. I thought I was protecting you." "Protecting me?" Charles turned, his gaze unwavering. "You were protecting yourself. Watching me look like a fool was probably entertaining for you." Dylan flinched, lowering his head. "It wasn't like that, all right? I was scared. I didn't want to lose our friendship." "It ended the moment you crossed the line with my wife," Charles replied coldly, disdain in his voice. Tension showed on Dylan's face as his jaw tightened. "Charles, we've been through so much together. Isn't there any way you can forgive me?" "Forgive you?" Charles's anger reignited. "You destroyed everything. My family, my trust, my pride. You think forgiveness comes that easily?" Dylan's voice broke as he whispered, "I made a terrible mistake. If I could fix it, I would." Charles sighed heavily, shaking his head slowly. "Some things can't be fixed, Dylan." The path was closed. Dylan reached out, placing his hand briefly on Charles's shoulder. "Charles, please," he murmured, but Charles recoiled, his face hardening as he shook off Dylan's hand. Don't ever touch me again." A fleeting shadow of defeat crossed Dylan's face, and he nodded slightly, his shoulders slumping. I never wanted it to end this way." But Charles's voice was icy. "Intentions don't erase what you did. Now, you'll have to live with it." Turning, Charles headed toward his home and shut the door behind him. He paused, leaning against it, as a wave of anger, betrayal, and disbelief washed over him, filling every breath he took. Later, alone in his study, Charles was engulfed by a flood of memories. For days he had tried to process the shock, to understand the betrayal that had shattered his once stable world. But he was done contemplating. It was time to act. Since that night, a thought had been forming in his mind, a plan that went beyond mere revenge. It was a precise, meticulously crafted scheme. Over the next few days, Charles assembled a team, beginning with a private investigator known for uncovering long-buried secrets. Together, they sifted through Dylan's financial records and business dealings. Charles had always known that Dylan was ambitious, sometimes to the point of recklessness, and now those same risks would be his downfall. One afternoon, the investigator laid a thick dossier on Charles's desk. "You were right," he said. "Dylan's entire operation hinges on tax evasion and connections with questionable people." Charles leafed through the file, and each incriminating detail filled him with a dark satisfaction. "Excellent. Send this to the authorities and keep a close watch on his accounts. I want updates as soon as they begin freezing his assets." The investigator nodded, and Charles allowed himself a rare, triumphant smile. The wheels were in motion. A few days later, Charles received the much-anticipated call. "Sir, you'll be interested to know. Dylan's accounts have now been flagged for investigation. Authorities have uncovered numerous suspicious transfers." "Perfect," Charles replied, satisfaction evident in his voice. "And make sure part of this documentation reaches the press. Let's see how Dylan handles public scrutiny." As the news spread, the consequences came swiftly. Investors pulled out, clients terminated contracts, and Dylan's business quickly spiraled downward. Charles watched as Dylan struggled to salvage his reputation, enduring grueling interviews and desperate attempts to repair his image, which only worsened his plight. Meanwhile, Nora faced the fallout of her own choices. Without Charles's financial support, her luxurious lifestyle was collapsing rapidly. Charles had made sure she had no access to his assets, and she was forced to confront the reality of life without him. She left their former home, selling her jewelry and designer clothes to afford a modest apartment. One evening, she appeared on his doorstep, her desperation evident. Her hair was disheveled, makeup barely concealing her exhaustion. She wore a designer coat that now seemed out of place, a reminder of a life she no longer owned. "Charles," she began quietly, her voice trembling, "could we talk?" He looked at her with a cold, unyielding expression. "We have nothing more to discuss, Nora. You're living with the consequences of your actions." Her voice broke into a barely audible whisper. "I didn't understand. I thought I could control everything. I thought somehow we'd be okay. Nora, this life you've built, it's all based on lies, and now you want me to pretend I don't see it?" Charles's voice was cold as ice, shattering the silence. "It's too late for that now." Nora's face darkened, her eyes filled with tears. She tried to hold herself together, her shoulders trembling under the weight of his words. "I know I made mistakes, Charles," she managed, her voice broken. "I thought I could hold it all together, protect everyone. But now I've lost everything. You, the kids, none of it ever truly belonged to me." Charles's jaw clenched, a shadow of disgust flickering across his face. "Not truly," he replied sharply. "You stole this from me, Nora, and you knew exactly what you were doing." Her hands trembled as she tried to wipe away her endless tears. "Is there any hope that you might one day forgive me?" she whispered. He looked at her, a shadow of their past flashing briefly in his gaze before disappearing completely. "No, Nora," he replied quietly. "There's no forgiveness here." A few days later, it was Dylan who tried to fix things. His voice messages piled up, each one more desperate, begging Charles to meet. When Charles finally responded, Dylan's voice was tense, his desperation clear. "Charles, please," he pleaded. "I just need a chance to talk." Charles listened, feeling a bitter satisfaction as Dylan's voice shook. "I'm at rock bottom, Charles. Everything I worked for is falling apart. You've won, I get it. But this is too much." Charles's voice was sharp and unwavering. "You don't get to decide what's too much, Dylan. Not after everything you've done." Dylan's tone grew even more anxious, close to panic. "I made mistakes, Charles, I understand that. But we've been friends for years." "We were friends because I trusted you," Charles interrupted. "For years you looked me in the eyes and lied. There's no friendship here anymore. Only consequences." Dylan took a deep breath, his voice on the verge of breaking. I understand. I just hoped we could talk. Find a way to make things right." "The only thing I need to make right is my own life," Charles replied coldly, "and there's no place for you in it." He ended the conversation, feeling the weight of finality. Dylan had made his choices, and now he would face the consequences. In the following months, Charles found a new rhythm, distancing himself from the lies and betrayals of the past. He started reconnecting with old friends, rebuilding ties that had faded over time. One evening, he met Aurora, a woman he had known before Nora entered his life. Aurora's warmth and kindness drew him in, making him feel seen in a way he hadn't in years. They met for coffee, laughed, and shared memories, but as they talked, something deeper began to awaken in him, a glimpse of hope. Aurora tilted her head, smiling at him with gentle understanding. "It's nice to see you like this, Charles. Truly happy." He nodded, feeling a lightness he hadn't felt in years. "I almost forgot what it feels like. For a while I thought this part of me was gone forever." She placed her hand on his, her gaze warm. "You're still here, Charles. You've been through so much, but you're still standing." As the weeks turned into months, their bond grew deeper. Aurora's quiet presence became a healing balm, soothing the wounds left by betrayal. She never pushed him to talk about his past. She simply stayed by his side as he rediscovered himself. Gradually, Charles began to open up, sharing his pain and experiences, and she listened with compassion, without judgment. One evening, as they strolled together under the warm city lights, Charles stopped and turned to her. "Aurora, I don't know where this will lead, but I haven't felt like this in years." She squeezed his hand, her smile comforting. "I feel the same way, Charles," she replied softly. "Let's just take it one day at a time." A warm feeling filled Charles as a rare and genuine smile appeared on his face. For the first time in many years, he saw a future free from the shadows of his painful past. But as he gained this newfound clarity, Dylan and Nora's lives began to crumble. Without Charles's help, Nora struggled to stay afloat under the weight of overwhelming debts, drowning in financial difficulties she could barely manage. Dylan's business had completely collapsed, and his once impeccable reputation was ruined, leaving him to piece together the fragments of his former life. Charles learned of Dylan and Nora's misfortunes through mutual acquaintances. They told him that Dylan now lived in a cramped, modest apartment, taking on any work he could find just to make ends meet. Nora had also drastically cut her expenses, moving to a small neighborhood far from her previous luxurious life, with her past pleasures now only memories. Charles felt no joy in their downfall, but he couldn't deny the quiet sense of justice it awakened in him. They had taken so much from him, his trust, peace of mind, and years of his life. Now, at last, they were facing the consequences of their actions. As he built a new life with his partner, Aurora, Charles felt a heavy weight gradually lift from him. Though his soul remained scarred, he now saw with clarity what truly mattered to him. He found fulfillment in a life where he was valued for who he was, not for what he could provide. The painful chapter was closed, and he knew he would never look back. One afternoon, immersed in paperwork at his desk, Charles heard a hesitant, almost timid knock at the door. He froze, immediately realizing who was on the other side. Taking a deep breath, he opened the door to find Nora standing there, looking exhausted and disheveled. Her former elegance was gone, her once well-kept hair was unkempt, and her expensive clothes hung on her as if they no longer belonged to her current state. Behind her stood Dylan, shoulders slumped and face lined with weariness and despair. The confident man Charles once knew could barely meet his gaze. "Charles," Nora's voice trembled as she spoke, "we need to talk." In silence, he stepped aside, allowing them into the living room. Closing the door, he felt the weight of the silence filled with unspoken emotions. Finally, Nora broke the silence, her voice barely a whisper. "We have no other choice," she muttered, looking down. She twisted her hands nervously, her voice strained and hopeless. "We've lost everything. The house, the cars, the accounts are empty. The business—" She glanced at Dylan, who kept his gaze fixed on the floor. "It's all over," Charles said calmly. "Your business, your home, your life, it's all destroyed. So why have you come here to tell me about it?" Nora's lips trembled, and she took a step closer. "Charles, I know what I did to you. I made unforgivable mistakes. I thought I could have it all without seeing the harm I was causing. You thought you could lie, deceive, and come out of it unscathed," Charles replied, his voice quiet but firm. "You built your life on lies and hoped there'd be no reckoning. Now that your illusion has shattered, you want my sympathy?" Dylan, who had been silent until then, finally looked up, his eyes red and pleading. "Charles, we know we let you down. We betrayed you, and the guilt doesn't leave us for a second. But isn't that enough? Haven't we already paid in full?" Charles let out a bitter laugh, shaking his head in disbelief. "You think this is revenge? This was justice. I raised children that both of you knew weren't mine. You used me, and now, with nowhere else to turn, you come to me, hoping I'll pull you out of the ruins of your own decisions." Nora stifled a sob, covering her mouth with her hand, instinctively reaching out to him, but Charles stepped back, his refusal unmistakable. "Charles, please," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I've lost everything that ever mattered to me." They needed just a small glimmer of hope to find solid ground again, but Charles merely raised an eyebrow, his tone detached and sharp. "Help?" he repeated, looking coldly at Dylan. "How many times did you mock me behind my back while building all this? Did you ever think of helping me while you took everything I created?" Dylan lowered his gaze, his voice trembling. "I was wrong, Charles. I thought nothing could threaten me, but you showed me how empty my world was." Charles shook his head, his voice quiet. "You brought this upon yourselves," he said, looking away. "Almost poetic, don't you think? After years of taking from me, you come now, with nothing left to lose." Nora stepped forward, her voice hesitant. "Charles, I know I don't deserve this, but can you forgive me? Could we start over?" Charles laughed softly, bitterly. Turning to face her, he replied, his gaze steady and unyielding. "Start over? You made your choice, Nora. As for forgiveness—" He paused, letting the weight of his words linger between them. "I don't owe you that." Nora's face contorted with pain as she covered her face with hands wet from tears. Dylan shifted uncomfortably, his shoulders heavy with regret. Charles took a slow, deep breath. "Nora, I devoted years to building a life with you, trusted you, only to be cast aside like something useless, just a convenient fool who would stay behind to clean up after you. And now you just want to ask for forgiveness?" Nora lowered her hands, her face full of sorrow. "Charles, we have nowhere else to go. I thought if we had enough—" Charles cut her off, his voice calm and firm. "You chose him, Nora. Now you have what you wanted, a life with him, not me. So go on. Find your path." Feeling the weight of his words, Nora slowly nodded. She took Dylan's hand and headed toward the door. But as her hand touched the doorknob, she paused and looked back, her voice soft and full of regret. "Charles," she said, her tone sincere and bitter, "once, I really did love you." Charles met her gaze, his expression resolute. "No, you loved what I could give you, the life I built, but you never loved me." Nora's shoulders sagged under the weight of his words. She nodded, unable to deny the truth, and opened the door, leaving with Dylan by her side. When the door closed, silence filled the room. But for Charles, this silence was different. It was a calm silence, free from the bitterness of betrayal. Charles sat down at his desk, surveying the familiar setting of his home. At last, he felt the house was truly his again, cleansed of deceit. In the days that followed, he began to look toward the future with a newfound sense of optimism. With the burden of the past finally lifted from his shoulders, he felt true freedom. One morning he awoke to the gentle sunlight streaming through his bedroom window. He stretched, feeling warmth he hadn't felt in years. Turning, he saw Aurora beside him, her face serene in sleep. He looked at her, struck by the peace she brought to his life. Opening his heart again hadn't been easy, not after everything he had endured, but Aurora had been patient, giving him the time and space he so needed. Their relationship had grown slowly, based on a quiet understanding. Aurora knew his whole story, every painful part of it, yet she had never rushed him. That quiet patience, he realized, had healed him more deeply than any grand gesture could. Aurora stirred, her eyes slowly opening, and in that simple, unspoken moment, he understood that he had found peace. She looked at him, her gaze tender and calm, a soft smile touching her lips. "Good morning," she whispered. "Good morning," he replied, tucking a strand of her hair behind her ear. Her hand found his, a quiet gesture that spoke of the closeness between them. "Are you ready for today?" she asked. Charles nodded, recalling their plans to visit his old friend, someone he hadn't spoken to in years, a friendship he had let fade during his marriage to Nora. This visit was more than just a reunion. It was a step back toward the life he had once left behind, to the people who had mattered to him before everything changed. Their morning began with breakfast, exchanged glances, and bursts of laughter that filled the air around them. When they finally stepped outside, Aurora took his hand, and as they walked along the bustling city streets, Charles felt a pride in having her by his side, a feeling he hadn't expected to feel again. Familiar places appeared along their path, stirring nearly forgotten memories, reminders of a time clouded by doubts and mistrust. But now, those memories seemed distant, like fragments of a life he no longer lived. When they finally reached Joseph's house, Charles felt a wave of anxiety. He hadn't spoken to Joseph since the painful end of his marriage to Nora and wasn't sure how it would go. But Joseph greeted him warmly, embraced him, and invited them both inside. They quickly fell into an easy conversation, with laughter and stories filling the gaps in the years that had separated them. After a while, Aurora sensed that the friends needed some time alone and excused herself. Once she had gone, Joseph looked at Charles with a smile that held a touch of understanding. "She's been good for you, hasn't she?" he asked. Charles responded with a grateful smile. "She's more than I ever thought I'd have again. After everything, I didn't think I'd allow anyone to come this close again." Joseph shook his head, a flicker of sadness crossing his face. "You deserve this, Charles. What happened with Nora was unforgivable." Joseph's words hung in the air, and for a while they sat in thoughtful silence. Finally, Charles spoke, his voice quiet and reflective. "It's been a hard road, Joseph. Harder than I can explain. There were times when I believed I'd never be able to trust again. But Aurora, she never demanded anything. She just stayed by my side, listened, and gave me the space I needed to heal." Joseph nodded, looking at him with understanding. "It's amazing what the right person can do," he said. Charles felt those words resonate deeply within him. "She taught me that the past doesn't have to hold me back, that there's still so much in life if I have the courage to step forward." They continued their conversation, diving into memories of their younger years. As the light began to fade, Charles felt gratitude for the chance to start anew. On the way back, Aurora reached out and found his hand. "Did you enjoy seeing him?" she asked, smiling softly. "Yes," he replied. "I'd forgotten what it's like to be with an old friend without feeling I had anything to hide." She squeezed his hand reassuringly. "You've come a long way, Charles. I see it in the way you carry yourself. You're no longer bound by the past." He looked at her, touched by her words. "It's because of you, Aurora. You've given me hope, a reason to move forward." They rode back in a comfortable silence. When they arrived back at his place, Aurora looked at him, a playful glint in her eyes. "So what's next for a man who's found himself again?" she teased. Charles laughed, feeling a new excitement rising within him. "I think it's time to start something new. I want to travel, to see the world. There's so much I missed out on because I was so consumed by the past." Aurora's eyes lit up with excitement, and she smiled. "Then let's do it. Let's plan an adventure, somewhere far from here." My friend, and this is the end of the story. If you liked this story, then put your royal like and subscribe to the channel. May the force be with you.